Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Transatlantic Call-In Show. We have a double not trans women show today, so it'll be interesting. As much as I love our usual hosts, including all the trans women we know and love, Josie, Arden, and Katy, they're not here today, so we're going to mask up this show a little bit more today. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm recovering from a gnarly sunburn that I got fishing last week. I don't normally make mistakes with sun care, but this time it's very painful on my shoulder over here. But other than that, I'm doing pretty good. How are you, Ben?
Doing all right. And I know you've been around here multiple times before, Luxander, but in case you wanted to reintroduce yourself to our audience, just in case people don't know who you are.
Yeah, I'm Luxander. You can find my primary YouTube channel is at Luxander Real. And I also have a second YouTube channel that I'm kind of starting to kick off this summer called at One Oasis Left, which is because I'm getting into fishing and hunting and gardening as skills to prepare for climate change induced food shortages. So that's the kind of stuff that I'm kind of getting interested in lately. And otherwise on my regular channel, I'm just I talk about trans issues, constantly talking about all the laws changing and everything. And it's a huge bummer, which is why I'm trying to do this other thing, kind of balance things out a little bit. But yeah, yes, always good to be here. I am officially on the line now, which is a great fun thing to announce this week. Yeah, I've always been just in, but now it's it's official. I'm here.
Official here. We're here, we're queer, we're ready to have a good show today. I know we got some spicy calls potentially waiting, but you'll have to wait a little bit for those because we have some polls to get to first. So let's see the poll from last week. Are you attending a Pride celebration this month? And unfortunately, only 25% of the crowd said yes, and 75% said no. And I know that this is a channel-wide thing, and not only the TACUS responses, which we may have a lot of cishet people responding to this, but I hope that more people would be able to go to a Pride celebration, and even our straight allies would go to a Pride celebration because it's not restrictive to only queer people. It's to celebrate all of us being who we are and being free to be who we are. So if you're cishet, you're not excluded from Pride events. We just hope that you don't shift the focus away from queer joy, and you be respectful to everybody. Luxander, what did you do for Pride so far?
I actually did go to a Pride celebration this month. It's the first time I've ever been to a Pride because typically I medically overheat and I have a very hard time maintaining my body temperature. So it's always June and I live in Kansas, so it's very hot and muggy, bad combo. But yeah, I went and I was just there in the morning, and honestly, I saw a ton of allies at the Pride celebration that I was at. Just tons of I may be straight, but I'm not narrow or whatever. Just a bunch of those kind of shirts. Yeah, so it was fun. A little parade thing. It did get kind of hot and muggy because I was wearing a respirator, as you do. So yeah, it was nice. I'm glad that I went. I'm glad that as a 30-year-old human, I finally just went to a Pride celebration, got a t-shirt, got a couple little knickknacks.
Hey.
So yeah, you went to Pride, right?
That's awesome. I did. And I got this lovely man cold from Pride. So I sound a little bit off today, but it was worth it because I went to Pride. And a few cool things happened. Namely, I did find a candy shop at the Pride celebration that was selling life-size dicks and vulvas in lollipops and also gummies. They had multiple different types. And so I did walk around the Pride celebration with a life-size mango-flavored dick, and I did suck on it right in front of the U.S. Capitol building. So I don't know what that says about this whole thing, but it was a great time. I also had to do some medicine I wasn't planning on needing to do during that. But all in all, it was a good celebration. Very happy that I went. And I'm sure people in the audience have some Pride stories as well. Tell us in the comments all of your fun Pride stories. And let's go on to the next poll. All right, so this one's super interesting, and I'll let Luxander kind of go on this one first. Would you like to read it and then share your thoughts?
Absolutely. So the question we're looking at this week, and you all can go to the community tab and click your answer, and then you can always add in the comments if you have any additional thoughts. We're asking, is it ever okay for cis people to publicly joke about trans people? And the reason we're asking is that there was this, I guess, semi-viral video that just went around, a female comedian named Eva Evans, who the segment is called like, I don't date poor people or something like that. If you want to go look it up for yourself, it's only about 10 minutes long. And yeah, she jokes about dating, and one of the dates that she describes is a date with a trans man. And so we're kind of interested in this because, I personally think that the jokes were funny. I think that she did a good job. And I was actually just thinking about this a couple days ago. Like, one of my favorite Flight of the Conchords songs has a trans joke in it. These two people don't actually know each other, but they're trying to figure out where they might know each other from. And one of them was like, "Oh yeah, Andy, how is that guy anyway?" And the other person says, "Oh, she's good." And then the first person's like, "Oh, Andy hates it when I forget that." And it's funny because they don't actually know the same Andy, but it's like, it's a good trans joke. It's done well. And so my personal opinion is that cis people can make good jokes where a trans person is involved. It's just about, are we doing this tastefully? Are we coming from the perspective as someone who says, like, I'm on Team TERF, like Dave Chappelle? I don't think anything he says about trans people can be funny if you're coming from that perspective, right? So it's all context. Has this person made off-color jokes before, or off-color comments before? And yeah, so that's my opinion. What about you, Ben?
Yeah, I saw the comedy set as well, and I thought it was really well done. It's great because I do think it's important to include different communities into humor. Like, I think it's definitely says one thing when you include minorities and then you're distasteful or you're insulting to them. Like, that's a bad thing. But I think it's also a problem to exclude minorities from humor, because that in another way is kind of othering them. So finding ways to be inclusive in humor, being able to laugh at each other tastefully is very important. And I think it's a good thing to have in the community. And I think that the way that this comedian went about it was incredible. And yeah, it was basically came down to, like, they were both poor and she didn't want to date another poor person, because how are two poor people going to support each other? But some of the jokes, like, they were definitely including the trans identity into the joke. But it wasn't, the joke at the end of the day wasn't, haha, you're trans. That's stupid. Like, the joke was, oh, this is kind of our experience, and specifically your experience. But then the punchline isn't being trans. Like, the punchline is something else.
Yeah, it can be very normalizing.
Done very well. Yeah, it was just normal. Like, that was just a normal part of the conversation. So I do think it was very well done, and I think people should, even before you respond to this poll, go watch that comedy set. Or I know there are other sets. I don't know many that are done by cis people, but I know there are plenty of comedians as well who are within the queer community that will make jokes that I think are appropriate. And that's maybe not specifically in line with this question, but I think there are plenty of ways for people to joke about queer people, and do it tastefully. So I recommend people watch sets like that.
And if you have any recommendations for either trans comedians or cis comedians who make good quality trans related jokes, please drop them in the comments of that poll. I might go watch them.
Ooh, absolutely. Yeah, and that being said, this is a call-in show. We do have call-in lines open, although they're filling very quickly. So The number is below on the screen here, or you can go to the web link in the description and try to get your calls in because our lines do fill very quickly. We also, if you'd like to support the channel, you can leave a super chat. We will read all the super chats, $5 or more at the end of the episode. So please leave your super chats and we will read them out loud. Other ways that you can support the channel are going to the Patreon. I'm sure we have a Patreon link somewhere in the description. Also liking, subscribing, sharing out the video to all your friends, getting people, to call in, all that jazz are ways that you can help out the show. And real quick, just an announcement before we get into some of these calls. We have other shows on this channel. I know that they're not as cool as us. Ours is the coolest show. But you can find lots of your favorite show hosts all throughout the week, including next up is on Sunday. We have the Sunday show with Paulogia and Gutsick Gibbon. We don't have an After Dark show this week, but most weeks we also have another Sunday show in the evening. Monday, we have Skep Talk with Shannon Q and Reason to Doubt, which I know both those people, and they're super cool. Tuesday is Chewed Gum. And Wednesday, again, we have the Hang Up with Matt Dillahunty and Paulogia. Thursday, we have Tag Us Again with Josie and Luxander, who's also right here. So lots of shows.
You're going to get a lot of me this month. I'm sorry, everybody. If you get sick of me by the end of June, too bad.
Lots of shows. You should go watch all of them. Share out the links to your friends. And we've got several calls here that look very interesting. Do you want to start with spicy or do you want to kind of ease into it a little bit?
I'm ready to go. I don't, if somebody's already been waiting for a while, then, I don't want to make them wait any further.
Okay. All right. Let's talk to Matthew, him from Ohio. It sounds like you're skeptical of trans identities. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. I am understanding of the singular they. That's a easy conversation to have. Somebody lost their keys. And if somebody identifies as, something different, I don't mind calling them they. I do have a problem with the whole she, her, if he's a male or if they're a male. So my question is, and maybe I should qualify a little bit. I do understand the difference between sex and gender, but I'm wondering when somebody transitions, when they have a mental issue that they feel like they need to transition, is that a sex thing that they want to change, or is that a gender thing that they want to change?
So first of all, I think you're already using a framing bias with saying that they have a mental issue to make them want to transition. I would encourage you, if we're going to have this conversation here, to keep it honest and not throw in certain biases like that right off the bat. Just try to take a neutral stance with some of your questions, and maybe this will be a bit easier.
Yeah. Real quick, I'm not trying to be I'm offensive. I have mental issues myself, like with anxiety and stuff like that, and health. I'm not trying.
Right, but these aren't the same thing. But these aren't the same thing. Being trans is not a mental disorder. It's not a mental illness, and I think it's okay to normalize mental illness, but we need to be clear that that being trans is not a mental illness. So I'd like it if we just separate.
Forgive me because my speech may be a little bit my speech may be a little bit inaccurate, but my point is that I mean the mental distress. Like somebody says, I do not feel like how I'm supposed to. I'm like I'm in the wrong body. That's what I mean, like the mental distress. Okay. I don't mean like any type of insult.
Gotcha. Thank you for clarifying that. I just want to make sure we're on the same page going into this.
Yeah, I don't feel like that should be considered an insult. But
yeah.
Okay, so they have the distress. Are they desiring to change their sex or their gender?
Luxander, do you want to jump in?
Depends on the person, right? So it depends on the person, okay. and there's there's the social aspect. And sometimes in the trans community, we'll kind of make a distinction between like social dysphoria, which is that I want to change how people treat me as far as gender is concerned. And then there's like what we would call more like physical or body dysphoria, where people, have this sense that like, even if I was born on a desert island, I would still really hate having the body parts that I was born with. kind of thing. So
Okay.
these things are we've kind of been talking about them as though they're separate for the last 7 or 8 years
Mhm.
in the discourse of all this, but realistically these things are very heavily entwined, right? We
I
tend
agree. I
to
agree.
Right, we tend to look at, let's say, if there's a person who's like, let's say a drag queen, right, who's a cisgender male who outside of the drag context is like, I'm a man, you're not going to get to have sex with me as a woman because I'm not a woman. I dress for the performance aspect as a woman, and maybe even they use she her pronouns when they're in drag. um so my personal opinion is like, okay, if you see someone who's clearly non-transitioning physically, we're going to kind of reflexively see them as a more of a cross-dresser, right? Which is kind of a new concept compared to like before medical transition was available. Obviously, the primary thing people would be looking at is how are you dressed, and that kind of informs what your gender is more. So like, but it depends on what person is transitioning. There are some folks who they just want to be able to dress differently and be recognized as like non-binary, for example. And there are non-binary people like myself who have undergone medical procedures and want to undergo medical procedures. So, yeah, it's in this current society, we look at people and it's a combination of their physical attributes and what they're dressed like that kind of causes us to reflexively view them in a certain way. And people might change how they dress, or they might change physical attributes in order to gain access to that social acceptance as the gendered role that they're trying to move into. Does that make sense?
Got it. I think so. So I talk to some atheists, and they'll tell me that I need to talk to more experts, and I'm assuming that you guys are the experts in this. So I agree with what you said, that they're not so separate. They try to present to me like, oh, they're completely separate. They're separate. I'm like, no, they're intertwined more than you think, and I think that's what you're kind of saying. Like they're more intertwined than people are presenting it to be from the LGBT community, because I feel like the LGBT community kind of does try to separate them completely, almost, where they're loosely connected rather than very connected. And you're saying that they're very connected, correct?
Well, well, I think we need to clarify a little bit, because I think there's a difference in what society should be and what society currently is. And so a lot of
Mm,
times when the queer community is like performing like protests and like advocacy and activism type things, like we're advocating for the ideal. We're advocating for what we want to happen, what we think the world should be, because I think we all know that we might not necessarily get there, but we need to strive for what is the ultimate end goal. And I think ultimately, in a society not like ours, the ideal essentially, and maybe Luxander would disagree with me on this. I think personally, like gender abolitionism is probably like the best place we could get, where like your body means nothing about how like society treats you. Like it's all self-expression. It's all self-ID. Like I
okay.
think that'd be the ultimate ideal, is people getting to decide for themselves who they are and how society is going to interact with them. And but that's not really doable in the society that we have, because we have a society that's set up with gender and gender hierarchies and a lot of different things that are already in place that we can't change. And so a lot of things like where we would want to separate sex and gender, and while they are separate concepts entirely, they are in our
Mm,
society interwoven. And so if you want to live your best life in the society that we have, you have to make some sacrifices in how you do that. So even if somebody is non-binary to where they want to be completely androgynous, like I have several friends who would identify as agender, like they make some compromises. Yeah, they make some compromises in order for society to recognize them as agender. And oftentimes that means taking on very androgynous performing type uh like ex- uh, sorry, I cannot speak, appearances, actions, etc. Same thing, like you can have like trans men who are very feminine appearing, but they understand that if they have to prioritize, would I rather have my self-expression be a feminine trans man, or would I rather be recognized in society as a man and give up a little bit of how I want to present?
Authenticity.
And so that's where we're at. And I think we shouldn't have to be there. Like, ideally, we should not have a society where you have to compromise like that. But unfortunately, we do right now. And so that's why you see a lot of trans people having to adopt a persona of hyper femininity or hyper masculinity, or I don't know, like hyper androgynous, whatever. Like, I don't know, all those terms. Like, you have to accentuate what you want to be seen as, because our society doesn't know. Our society doesn't know what to do with people if they don't fit into a certain box. And I think we're doing a better job at pushing those boundaries, but it's going to take a long time if we can even hope to get there. I don't know how possible it is with the societies that we have set up. But I hope that kind of set some context for why our actions maybe don't seem to align with the way we talk about it. I'd love to hear
that's kind of where
your
I was
thoughts.
going. But
yeah,
you mentioned femininity. Now, is femininity a gender thing or is that a sex thing?
I mean, both, right?
So
because femininity is like long hair is feminine, right? It's a social decision. We all grow hair, but like it's a social decision whether to wear your hair long or not. Now, I know men who have long hair, and some of them have gotten guff from other men about it, right? But we also recognize things like certain face shape is considered feminine in our society, and like certain body features are considered feminine, like having like the bigger the breasts you have, the more feminine people would describe you as, I think, you know? So like femininity, like the thing is that like we try to treat these terms totally separate, but like they are very intertwined. And like, I think that, you know, that was like a rhetorical choice trying to say like, well, you know, I think there were trans people who were trying to say, look, I'm just trying to change my gender. I'm not claiming that scientifically I can change my sex. And that's because they're trying to gain some kind of cultural acceptance with cisgender people. And then now, at least in the circles that I'm in, we kind of look at it like, well, if you are physically changing almost every meaningful characteristic that we attribute to sex, then yes, functionally you can change your sex, even if you can't change your chromosomes. I mean, most of us don't know our chromosomes anyway, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say femininity is a more of a term related to gender expression. And so I think that's something, and we can all debate semantics about where these specific things fall into. But if you focus purely on a sex versus gender like scale, we're still missing the component of expression that is separate from your gender identity and your sex. Because like I mentioned, you can have a cis man who has a feminine expression and they're still a man. Like their gender is still male, their sex is still male, but their expression is feminine. And like there's even like expression on that much of an absolute is like not super accurate, because you can have like expression is very fluid and dynamic and all of that. But I think understanding that there are multiple layers to this and multiple like seemingly contradictory attributes that people can have. And so I think what we need to do is focus less on these extremes of like, are you on this pole or this pole? Like understanding that these are multiple different facets of people, and it's not going to be super cut and dry really for anybody.
Okay. So I think you guys gave me some clarity, but I'm still considering, when I have these conversations, there's this absolutist, it's like sex and gender is completely different, and you're just stupid and blah, blah, blah. I get into these crazy conversations, believe it or not. And so I'm thinking like a Venn diagram, like scientifically speaking here, because this is the conversations we get into is very scientific. Scientifically speaking here, Venn diagram, you have sex and you have gender. How much overlap is there? Is there like a little bit crescent moon left over piece, or is it like a whole
I think
big...
I think if we're speaking scientifically, it's disingenuous to even make that argument, because we're talking about different attributes of the same physical person. So, like, if you think of gender being psychology, like this is what's inside your brain, which I would argue that your psychology is not separate completely from your physical body. Like this, it's an emergent property of your physical body.
It's neurological. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, it's just a different body system than your hormone and your endocrine system versus your reproductive system. Those are all systems of the same body. So I think if we like arbitrarily assign like endocrine, reproductive, etc., to be on this like biological sex category, and then we arbitrarily also assign your neurological, psychological, gender identity to be on this separate gender identity thing. Like those are labels that we've assigned to it, but they're not separate things entirely. They're all one person. They're all different systems of one person. And so if you kind of take the different attributes of one person and you kind of add them together, that kind of gives you the whole person. So I think separating them out for one person and saying how much overlap is there, it's just an odd question to ask. Like if I separated out your cardiovascular system and your respiratory system, they're different things. They have different functions, but they're so overlapped that you cannot separate them out in the same person.
I actually agree with that.
It's like I feel like that's I feel like I don't know. It seems like maybe are you having this kind of discussion with trans people, or are you having this discussion with?
No, these are mostly atheists that are allies.
So you're not having this discussion even with trans people. So this just sounds like some weird mental masturbation argument.
I have some discussion with a trans person, like probably like one trans person. I had a full conversation.
Do you have these debates? Do you have these debates with trans people, or are you just arguing about trans people without trans people present?
No. So what I try to do is like, I'll give an example. Maybe I'll have a conversation. This is not always the case, but I'll have a conversation with a trans person, and we'll be getting along. I'll be understanding what they're saying, and then an atheist ally will come in and say, "How dare you talk about this person like that? How can you do that? This is this." And then the trans person kind of sit back because I guess they feel like they're being protected, or they feel like they have allyship, which I understand. They feel like they don't have any. So when an ally comes, you don't want to push that person away, even though you don't 100% agree with them. And then it's like, now I'm debating with this person, and it's more hostility, and it's just like, okay, well, I don't mind the hostility, but let's have a conversation.
Okay, like that's I don't know the whole context of this, but it sounds like getting like bringing to us a discussion that you have with another like cishet person that's not trans. Like I don't know.
Well, they told me I need to ask the expert, so I'm just like, well, I got the opportunity, so I'll do it. So it's not that big of a Good?
Yeah, and Luxander, I don't want to dominate this discussion, but I just want to be careful. Like, I want to be careful that we're not encouraging you to go out and like talk about trans people when they're not part of the discussion. And like having a discussion like this, I think it's important to figure out for yourself what is gender identity, like what is biological sex, like how do these things fit together? And I think it's a valid question. But I just would exercise a lot of caution in having debates like this without the minority group present. It just seems like a weird mental masturbation exercise where you get to throw your pedantry into the circle of like, how does this Venn diagram work? What are these definitions? And I think those are okay discussions to have, but I think having that with such pedantry, like without the people present, without knowing how that discussion impacts those people, it can be dangerous. Especially if you don't know how the words, like the important thing is how do the words I use impact the people I'm talking about? And if you're not including people in the room from that circle, you might not know how those words are impacting them at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's not for lack of trying, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. I think we'll move on to another call, but thanks for calling in.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah. I'll be here next week if you want to call back in and get any further clarification. Thank you.
Yeah. Any kind of closing thoughts from that one?
I think I pretty much covered everything. Like, I wasn't sure what the point of contention really was. I think it's just he was like, I'm trying to understand because some people are saying, oh, these things are totally separate to each other. And like, I do think that is a rhetorical failure. I used to do it though. Let me be clear. I used to be one of those like, oh my God, sex is totally different from gender. Like they're not. If nothing else, like you were saying, everything that is happening in your brain is like an extant function of your biology. So like we can't really separate these things. Even if we can't find it, I always feel like we need to be careful when we talk about neurological gender, because it's like, oh, well, that means that we could find the part of your brain and then lobotomize it. Like, no, we don't know what part of your brain makes you prefer vanilla over chocolate. We know that the pleasure center lights up when you have vanilla, but we don't know like where it is any more than we know where gender lives in your brain. But like it's a function of your brain. So like what point is there in distinguishing gender as a purely social construct, which it is a social construct, but like so is sex. Sex is a social construct based on certain characteristics. So yeah, for me, those two things, like, sure, if you want to have a conversation about gender expression or gender dynamics and patriarchy, like, cool, that's a discussion we can have that often doesn't necessarily relate directly to sex, but most conversations about gender are going to involve that to some extent. So like, why? It would, like I said, rhetorical failure, in my opinion.
Yeah, the sociology is very intense
He's also
around
a
this
science,
topic.
though.
It's there are people with entire degrees devoted to this one topic, and it can get very nuanced, and I think it's super fascinating. I'm not an expert in that, and I defer to my sociology colleagues. But it's very interesting to read about. If people are interested in like how gender functions at a societal level, because it's way over my head. But yeah, I think we've got some more calls on the line, and
Matt, we've got room if you want to call back and get on the queue.
Yeah, I'm like trying to see if
he dropped the queue for a second there.
Yeah, I think we'll take Mustafa, if I pronounce your name correct. I apologize. Him from Minnesota. Sounds like you want to talk about how to fight off anti-trans arguments like assault in the bathroom. So it sounds like you're wanting some clarification on how to engage with the bathroom argument from a pro-trans perspective. Is that what am I getting that correct?
Yep, but I do want to clarify a little bit more. But before I do, am I coming in okay?
Loud and clear?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. I'm also working while talking to you guys. So yeah, it's kind of a broad thing, really, but yeah, that is part of it. Also, the presence of trans women in women's sports is another thing. Yeah, because I do consider myself to be an ally. I mean, I'm also, I think I'm the only straight guy in the gay district in Minneapolis too. But yeah, I would like to hear some pro-trans arguments on those fronts if I'm ever confronted on those arguments.
Yeah, are there any specific arguments that you're having a problem sifting through? Because maybe it'd be easier for us to kind of target the specific things that you've heard and see kind of how we would respond to those.
Yeah, like on the bathroom one, the argument I always hear from the pro-trans side is that, these instances are very rare. However, they do happen, and saying something is very rare, no matter what the context is, may not be sufficient enough for a person with concerns, illegitimate or not, to be perfectly cool with that. You know what I mean?
Like, what specific instance were people talking about? Do you know?
It's a story that you see once in a blue moon, where a person claiming to be trans, but not really, would go into a bathroom of their opposite sex, usually a male entering a women's bathroom, and then assaulting someone in said bathroom, which again is a very, very rare instance, and I do acknowledge that, but it does still happen.
I'm actually not sure that I've ever seen a substantiated instance of that occurring. I've actually heard stories of a man following a trans woman into the female restroom to accost and assault her. So basically, what I'm gathering here, you're talking about this with people who are concerned about male violence toward women in bathrooms, right? So my kind of arguments around this have to do with, like, first of all, it doesn't happen at all, as far as I can tell, or very rarely happens. There are plenty of instances of adult men assaulting young boys in male restrooms. Are we going to create like children's restrooms versus adult restrooms? Like, is this very rare thing worth like restricting an entire group of people? Like, assault is still illegal, you know? I think what we're dealing with here is a situation where women feel as though they are unsafe, even though there is no evidence to substantiate the idea that they should be afraid. In fact, trans people are far more likely to be accosted and assaulted in restrooms than any cisgender person. Like trans women even have a higher rate of sexual assault than cis women do. Sorry, go ahead, Ben.
Well, yeah, and I was going to bring up an example of recently. This is an adolescent trans woman who was doing what she was told to use the men's
boys' bathroom.
And she got assaulted and broke her jaw, knocked some teeth out, etc. Like, for doing what people wanted her to do and use the correct bathroom. So like look at this from multiple perspectives. So like, if somebody were to use the bathroom that they wanted to use, like, think about everybody involved in, like, number one, enforcing these things to happen, enforcing people to use the correct bathroom, having society ready for what they ask for. Like, I see multiple memes too of like a person who looks feminine, not sure if that's a trans person or a drag queen, or I don't know. But like, there's a meme where somebody with long blonde hair and a dress was using a urinal in the men's bathroom, and somebody was making a weird face. It's like, okay, well, but this is what you're asking for. If you're asking for trans women to use the men's bathroom, like,
and
you're
there's
asking
also
for
the
that
fact
situation.
that, like, very masculine trans men who have a vagina are being told to use the women's restroom. So, on the one hand, I think we have this argument going like, well, what's going to stop a man from just saying he's a woman and entering the female restroom? But at the same time, what is stopping a cis man from alleging that he is a trans man and saying, no, this is the bathroom that I'm supposed to be in? You know, under either system, you're just dealing with disingenuous cis men who are making false claims.
Yeah.
And like, again, does it make sense to restrict trans people's rights to public access based on some bad faith actors?
So if I could just weigh in, I totally agree with absolutely everything you guys said, as well as some of these other examples that you shared. However, and I'm just playing the devil's advocate here, can you see where an anti-trans person would say that's just a whataboutism and it doesn't really change the fact of the occurrence of the possibility that of those instances happening where a trans person or someone claiming to be a trans.
No, it's not a good argument. It's not a good argument at all. Like, from their side, I can see where they would be worried if they don't know any better, but that doesn't mean that it's a good argument, or it's a perspective that should be held as if it's a legitimate argument. You can be freaked out about anything. Like, people panic about GMOs. People panic about, like, Dungeons and Dragons being satanic. Like, people panic about a lot of things that are stupid. And just because somebody panics about something doesn't mean that it's legitimate or, like, necessitating the panic that's surrounding it. And, like, one of the easiest ways, I think, to debunk the whole bathroom argument is just asking people how they would plan on enforcing these bathroom laws. Like, how would you enforce this? Like, if you're saying that you can only use the bathroom based on your sex assigned at birth, how do you determine who gets to use what bathroom? Do you see where the issue is there with that argument?
Yeah, but at the end of the day, people are still going to fall into their final vocabularies, and
Okay, no, but ask them, and that's why when you're in the argument, bring up this point. I don't know if you're actually seeing where I'm getting at. Do you get where I'm going with this? Tell me, how would you, like, if you're playing the devil's advocate, how would you enforce this bathroom law?
honestly, I don't know.
You don't know,
Exactly.
right? Because
That's the answer to the
because the
question.
answer would be, yeah, the answer would be genital inspection of everybody walking into the bathroom. And that is absolute insanity. We cannot do that. Nobody would support that. And that would further make victims of the people they're trying to protect being cis women, because everybody would have to like prove themselves before using the bathroom. And so I get you're trying to take the devil's advocate position. It's a terrible position. And this one argument like really shows how terrible that position is. And so I know you have a lot of, but what about like they're not going to listen? Like, yeah, and if they're not going to listen, they're not going to listen. That doesn't mean that the argument is good, and that doesn't mean that their panic is legitimate.
Well, I can definitely see where you're coming from there, and I guess I didn't do a good job at playing devil's advocate because I was being too reasonable, thinking about genital inspections as a possibility that could come across someone's mind. So I do appreciate that, Dave. The other thing I want to go over, and I don't want to take up too much time because I'm sure there's a billion people that are trying to call you, is on the topic of sports. I will admit, first off, that this is something I'm kind of apathetic to because I don't like sports, period, but it's something that's brought up all the time, and I literally cannot navigate through those discussions. But speaking as a progressive, politically and socially speaking, I do kind of see that it is the level of odds when it comes to being against the patriarchy while also being okay with a trans woman who is athletic with strong like biologically male attributes competing against other women. And I can kind of see where those two different beliefs can kind of be at odds with each other. And I guess I would like to hear your guys' take on that as well.
Yeah, so I think here's something that will help you a lot just with all of these discussions. Don't use your intuition to think through these problems. Go to data. Like, go to the actual citations. Like, and if you've got people bringing up an argument, have them cite their sources. Go read the studies, like by the United States Air Force. Go to the studies put out by I'm sure Stephanie Helms has a lot of different. She has a whole list of citations, and I don't know if she can post them somewhere where people can access them. But there are citations upon citations upon citations that are being used in this debate. And so, same thing kind of with the bathroom discussion and with this one, like. It's easy to fall into these cognitive traps when you are just doing a logic in your brain because we're so susceptible to cognitive bias. We're so susceptible to what our own knowledge is limited by. And I can tell that's the case here. So I think maybe instead of just trying to rationalize your way through these conversations, go to the data and then make your perspective based on the actual data that we have, and then you'd be able to engage more accurately with some of these discussions because it's no longer just here's the information I can pull out of my head somewhere. This is like the stuff that we have written, published, and that we have a certain amount of confidence in. Luxander, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so much of this discussion about sports is based on this gut feeling like, oh, well, obviously men are so much stronger than women. Oh, obviously they can outperform women in every situation. But there are so many factors that go into that. Like women perform worse than men on average, partially because women's sports are dramatically underfunded. And also, there's a concise term for this phenomenon, and I can't remember what it is right now. But like, if you take a group of girls and you tell them, like, oh, you're about to take a math test and you're going to do fine. And then another group of girls, you tell them, okay, you're about to take a math test and generally girls perform worse on this. the second group will perform worse. So in my humble opinion, the separation of sports in this gendered way in the first place causes women to underperform on a systemic level. But yeah, we need to look at the data. Like, a lot of the data that has been done on this it's just data, cis men versus cis women, and then stereotype threat is what it's called. Thank you, Arden. So yeah, a lot of the studies that people look at are comparing cisgender men to cisgender women. And of course, cisgender men perform better because of the reasons that we've listed already. But once you start looking at actually, let's look at cis women and trans men and cis men. We've just had a study commissioned by the Olympic Committee that showed that trans women perform worse than cis women on certain metrics, partially because trans women are required to have a lower blood concentration of testosterone than cis women have naturally. Trans women are forced to medically have less testosterone, and if we're pinning all of this performance stuff on testosterone, and that's not an accurate way of measuring this, but yeah, trans women actually perform worse if you actually look at the data. And we would also want to see, well, you've been able to perform at the Olympics for 20 plus years as a transgender woman if you are undergoing hormone therapy for a certain period of time. And if we were going to see men, or even trans women, whatever, if we were to see people assigned male at birth who are trying to simply perform in women's sports, we would see them dominating by now. We would see like a difference where like, oh, we've actually boxed cis women out of sports, right? Which is kind of what the fear is, that cis women are not going to be able to perform, but we haven't seen that bear out. So again, like Ben was saying, so much of this is based on this gut feeling. And I think that it's probably a good idea to go like, listen, is your gut feeling actually based on reality? Or are you just prioritizing your feelings over the facts,
Yeah. And another question I had within this realm, and I promise this is my final one, and then
we
got to move on after this one question
because we've got a lot of calls, so if it's quick.
Okay. Do you think that if we simply separated every sport, not by gender but by sex, and make that explicit, would that no? Okay, you know where I was going with
height and weight classes. Height and weight classes.
No, it should be height and weight. Height and weight is what's going to be it. Like, height, weight, and experience level are the big things, because that's the other thing. Like, people don't understand that like muscle mass is not like equivalent to ability in sports, and so many people think that, and it's a patriarchal problem that we've made for ourselves of saying that, oh well, if you're a male and you have this muscle mass, then you're just going to dominate in like all sports, and that's not true. Like, think about all different sports that there are. There's so many different types, like and even this bias comes from people thinking that men's sports are superior to women's sports, kind of going back to what we were previously talking about. But like, gymnastics as a sport, it requires a lot of strength and a lot of agility, and female body types tend to do better at agility based exercises, and not even just like female bodies, but smaller bodies, it's different body types, different experience levels, different, like, even different types of muscle fibers that you have. Like, if you have fast twitch versus slow twitch muscle fibers, like if you have certain amount of bone mass versus not, like certain proportions, like torso length versus like leg length, like all of these things factor in, but they're not things that people talk about. Like, imagine if people started debating about like, oh, this person's torso size is longer than this other person's. Like, it does matter. And like, arm length does matter for things like boxing, but that's not what people are worried about. People go back to this bone density and muscle mass thing, which it's a dishonest point of discussion. So we're factoring in variables, we're not factoring in variables that would be factored in, and then making certain variables too much of a big deal. So I think go back to the data. I think a lot of what we're thinking comes from a very patriarchal method of thinking about it, and we need to get away from that as much as possible. So I'm gonna let you go.
100%.
And we're gonna take some other calls, but have a good rest of your Thursday. I would love to not have the sports conversation like ever again.
Every
I'm
single
sure
time.
multiple
Yeah.
people are. Yeah. Like there are plenty of other things to talk about, and if people just read the data,
It's helped me refine my
Um,
arguments.
yeah.
It's much quicker conversation now than it used to be.
Yeah. Let's take another one. This one is from Kiwi, they, them from Canada. It sounds like you want to talk about. Hold on, I'm trying to hit the talk button. There we go. It sounds like you want to talk about speech and its relation to violence. I'm very curious. Can you kind of clarify the
Yeah.
topic for us?
Yeah. Sorry, having some audio issues here. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess I just always hear this trope that right-wingers like to kind of laugh at progressives and say, haha, speech isn't violence. So I wanted to understand if you guys actually do hold that perspective, and I wanted to understand if you could explain it a little bit to me.
So the term violence actually encompasses more than we typically assume. We actually use the phrase physical violence to distinguish physical violence from other types of violence. Like if you are financially abusing someone and you're denying them access to their money or like whatever, something along those lines, like that is a type of violence, right? I personally think it's pretty disingenuous, though, to refer to speech as violence. Like I remember once a few years ago, there was a trans person who was saying that another atheist YouTuber was a violent transphobe because of his beliefs about trans women in sports. And it's like, okay, it might technically be one definition of violence is like if you deny someone their rights is a type of violence. Like, okay, but when people hear the word violence, they generally are going to assume that you mean physically violent, right? So when I am speaking, I want to be as clear as possible. And I don't want to use deliberately inflammatory language that gives off the wrong impression about what the discussion is even about. Like if the discussion is about should trans women be in sports, like I don't think that it's fair to describe that as violent, even if the person is technically on some level like trying to deny someone their rights to public participation, which is a form of violence, right? Because I personally think that that's a tactic of manipulation where you're trying to portray your opponent in the worst possible fashion. And that is a way for you to justify like any level of retaliation against them. Like, oh my God, this guy is a violent transphobe. We need to cancel him and like take away his YouTube channel or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I'm assuming you would draw a line at someone like who's that comedian that comedian who's really against trans people, Dave Chappelle. So would you say that he is doing violence? It sounds like you were saying that he is not doing violence, or technically he might be doing it, but it would be inflammatory to say that. Is that what you would say?
Yeah, I personally would say that it's hate speech, but I think that it would be muddying the waters if I said that Dave Chappelle was a violent transphobe. I think that people are going to draw a lot of conclusions about that are not accurate.
Okay. Well, yeah, you know what? I don't think we have anything to disagree with here. I thought you guys are a lot more reasonable than I honestly thought you would be. So I'm actually really happy
maybe
to hear
Ben
this.
disagrees.
I don't know.
Yeah. Oh no, I think I agree. I think it's very important to be deliberate with our language, and communicate accurately what we're trying to say. Because like it's for that reason. Like I think we want to save those terms for when they are accurate. And then they will hold more power when we use them in their more accurate settings. So that's not to say that hate speech is a good thing. Like I think we can use the term hate speech and that should be able to draw enough attention, and maybe the term is being thrown around so much that people are getting numb to the term, and that's unfortunate. But I still think that that's more accurate, and we should maybe do more about like reacting to it and not being so numb to it. So
Okay, well, yeah, I appreciate your guys' perspective. That's really all I had to ask about. So yeah, thanks for having me on.
Cool.
Yeah, thanks for calling in. With that, next on the line, we're going to talk to Violet, they, she from Canada. Sounds
Hi,
like you want to talk about the medical system and access to resources. Is that kind of what the lines are for your topic?
Sorta. The best way I could explain it is there's a debate right now with Philosophy Tube versus a lot of people that seem to be almost leaning trans-medicalist, but it's a little bit more nuanced than the trans-medicalist versus non-trans-medicalist. But the debate sort of going on is whether we should need a medical diagnosis like gender dysphoria in the first place in order to decide our access to healthcare. And obviously, part of this is like national differences. Like in the UK, the system is inherently corrupt in the medical system. In the US, it's partially corrupt, I'd say. It's more complicated, depends on which state you're in. And there's also like a lot of per doctor differences. So like the question sort of is more of a like, should we need to have even something like informed consent as a requirement for accessing types of medical care that aren't necessarily objectively proven to be harmful?
No, you absolutely need informed consent. So I'm going to say you do not need a diagnosis. You should not need a diagnosis. Like if you're an adult and can make your own decision, you should not be required to have a diagnosis to get healthcare. I do think you need informed consent in that case because you need to be able to. It doesn't matter what the risk is. If there is risk, you need to be able to consent to those risks. And that's with anything in life. Like that's with consent to get in your car and drive to work. That's consent with really anything. Like and we don't explicitly say consent like with those things in our life. We just kind of accept. Like, but we accept the burden of that. Like anytime we go about anything in our lives, like I acknowledge that if I eat a sandwich, there's a small risk that I could choke on it and die. I don't necessarily act as if I'm going to die every time I eat a sandwich, but it is a risk that I acknowledge that I am taking. Anytime, like anything you do has risk. But that being said, like with things that you are providing a service for, especially if you're providing a medical service that does change your body and does, in a lot of cases, change it irreversibly, which like people can debate about that, but primarily masculinizing transition has some irreversible components to it. And you need to know, like, and I think every individual should be able to make their own decision about what risk they're willing to take with that and what things they want to do, because that's their own business. But they need to know that that is a risk that they're taking. And it should be the responsibility of the person providing the service to tell the person what things that they're risking. And I think that's safe practice. That's what should be done with any medical procedure. I mean, vaccines are very, very safe, but we still give people the informed consent conversation about like, hey, your child could have a fever. Your child could have a seizure related to fevers, which we don't really do anything about. It's usually fine, but you need to know that this could happen. And so I think, and maybe I can let you finish more of your discussion about what specifically your take is on the informed consent discussion. But I personally think that is something we should not. I think informed consent as a model is the best way to not gatekeep, if that makes sense.
Okay, I'll let Lux speak first though, because I'm curious what Lux's opinion on it is.
I think, I mean, obviously informed consent, like whether you are getting a diagnosis or not, informed consent is going to be part of the process. But I think that the greater conversation here that you're alluding to, Violet, because you mentioned in your call screener something about Philosophy Tube, like, should gender dysphoria diagnosis be required? Like, I am personally of the opinion that it is deeply unjust form of segregation in the medical system. Like if we're looking at the UK specifically, although this is also the case in the United States for sure, like in the UK, a cisgender woman who is growing a mustache can go to her general practitioner and probably with a fairly short conversation and with no blood tests can get put on estrogen birth control to manage her masculinization, right? She won't necessarily have like hair removal covered by the NHS, but nobody's going to try to stop her from getting her hormone levels corrected. But a transgender woman who has like fundamentally the same problem, like let's just say sticking with the facial hair thing, to have to go to your general practitioner and then get a referral and wait an extended period of time for a first appointment at a segregated gender clinic, and then go through intensive psychiatric screening involving highly invasive questions about your sex life, and then to be like carrot on a stick in front of you for like several years as you're waiting to get this care in the first place, I think is deeply unjust. I've seen some people make the argument that like, oh, well, you need to have a diagnosis to have this covered by your insurance. Like, no, you don't. Do I need a diagnosis of any kind to get birth control in the United States covered by my insurance? No, I don't require a diagnosis. So what, like, why are we relying on this system? It's because the way that we do medicine is reactive in one way. And also because, like, yeah, we've created this model based on dysfunction rather than a model based on optimal health, you know?
Yeah, I think I understand where Ben's coming from, and I definitely agree with most of what you said, Lux. I think the biggest concern I have with having a risk be the determination of access is anyone can get access to a trampoline, and a trampoline can cause permanent damage, especially to children. And there's very little, if any, regulation on parents getting a trampoline for their child. But like everybody understands that a trampoline has some informed consent. The moment you step on that trampoline, you better be prepared for potentially falling off and breaking your leg, because that is a real possibility, even with a net. If you get double bounced or something, there's like any number of mishaps that people can get on with these backyard trampolines. But like there's no, you don't have to go to a doctor, wait 6 months, and then be given 2 informed consent from 2 doctors to get access to a trampoline. And so, like,
well, but I'm not saying that that's how the system should be. Like, informed consent should only like it, and if you're, and I guess maybe we're talking a little bit different of things, because informed consent does not mean you need 2 separate people to sign off on you to get things or to have a wait. Like
that was my experience,
and that's not a flaw with the informed consent model. That's a flaw with that administrative model. But my informed consent model, like I had an appointment and they prescribed me the same day. Like they said, here are the risks, here are the benefits. I said, cool, awesome. I signed like the forms, whatever. I got my prescription same day, and I started that same day. Like, I think equating problems with your specific country's model with that being an issue of informed consent is problematic, because that's a totally different discussion.
That's a misunderstanding on my part then, because that was my understanding what informed consent was.
No, informed consent is just you being able to make your own decision and then accepting risk for that decision.
Yeah, that I'm in favor of for the same reason. If you like want to have a rock climbing wall and you have an informed consent that, you know, someone could get bumped and lose a tooth or something. Like, obviously there should be protections for service providers from unjustified suing by making sure people know the risks that are involved, so that if a risk does occur, there's reasonable procedures to ensure that people are treated right with that. Like, that I completely agree with. It's more just a matter of what it ends up being in practice, in my experience, and certainly in the UK and in a lot of countries, is this notion of you can't just walk in and get informed consent and get out. For most of these things, there are like gatekeeping inherent to that system.
Yeah, and I think that's
I'm
what you're
not
taking
sure
and
issue
how
part
with
much of
needs to
is
that
go
the
away.
gatekeeping.
Yeah, and I think we're all on the same page here. I think we all agree that the gatekeeping shouldn't be there. So
Yeah, but it is a bummer. I
Yeah.
will say, like, you know, it's the procedure in Canada, and also the procedure for insurance in the United States, where
Yeah.
we're required to like get like, you know, if I wanted bottom surgery, not only are there normative like imposing norms on my body, like such as, oh, you need to be on testosterone for a certain period of time, or oh, you need to have top surgery first. In addition, like I would need to go to a psychiatrist. Sometimes they require you to go to a PhD psychiatrist, which good friggin' luck finding one.
Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
getting like two cisgender people to sign off on me getting a surgery
Yeah.
that I have wanted since I was like 14, even though I didn't know that it was an option when I was 14, you know? Like, so yeah, I think we all kind of can get on board with like there should be the same amount of gatekeeping. If a cisgender woman can be informed of like, okay, you're informed of the risks of surgery in the sense that under anesthesia, this could happen, or during the recovery, this could happen. That should be the same level of requirements for a trans woman seeking top surgery. And it's like, yeah, it's
or
this
birth control
cis
for that
supremacist
matter.
ideal.
Like birth control is basically hormones, so
It literally is. Like, you know, I'm functionally taking the same medication that like a trans woman would be taking. So yeah, it's pretty annoying that like cis people are calling all the shots on this, and they're calling all the shots from a cis supremacist perspective that, oh, a cis person who feels gender dysphoria or gender inadequacy of some kind, well, those feelings are natural and normal. Of course, a woman with small breasts wants to get top surgery, but a trans woman who's experiencing the same thing is being pathologized, and I think it's dumb.
yeah.
And a lot of
I'm
this
in the
comes
same
from
way.
and a lot of this still comes from the very like misogynistic medical system that we have to begin with. The fact that we still have a lot of people being denied, still have a lot of cis people being denied hysterectomies because they don't have enough children or aren't old enough. And I think that's starting to go away. I think now people are more willing to do hysterectomies on younger people, but there's still things in our medical system that are like across the board gatekeeping for even for cis people, and all of that needs to go away too. Like, so I think our whole outlook on how we look at like reproductive health especially needs to just be completely reworked, because all of it's from a very patriarchal perspective. And if we can just have more of an informed consent model for people across the board, if we regulate those things more similarly to how cis men can get whatever procedures they want, I think we're all on the same page here.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. I think the biggest thing that I've heard pushback on was with facial feminization surgery, and my argument has always been, well, facial reconstruction surgery, at least in Canada, generally is covered by insurance, and that could be argued in some cases is cosmetic. Some cases it genuinely like could affect your nostrils or could affect your eyesight. You can argue that there are cases where facial reconstruction has medically necessary circumstances, but a good portion of it is aesthetic. But then we say certain types of aesthetic is cosmetic and certain types aren't. And so at what point then are we basically just putting our cosmetic values of what should be occurring in how insurance is covered? Because like if facial feminization can oftentimes be the same types of things as facial reconstruction, depending on obviously the type, then like to me at least, like even with like laser hair removal, that's seen as cosmetic, but like there are medically necessary things that sometimes require that technology that it's not covered because it's assumed to be cosmetic until proven otherwise, essentially.
And we're going to be
This is
fighting
where
this
I
battle
think
for
it's
so long as like money is involved in the
Yeah.
system, you know, because it's like,
Yeah.
oh, do we
I
want to
think
cover this under tax pay or whatever? Or it does the insurance want to pay out? Like it's all a money problem.
Yeah,
It's
it's a
power and
system
money.
problem, and it's heavily nuanced. In that you have to define certain things and you have to justify certain things, and a lot of it's going to come down to like individual need, which it's all messy, and it's too messy for me to really even say what the right answer is on this kind of show, just because I'm not, I can do medicine. I am not as knowledgeable about how to set up a medical system and how to work with money. Like, people should not trust me with their money.
Fair.
But that might be a good future discussion, though. Love it if you call back, we can continue that.
Yeah, I'll think on this and think if there's like a different angle that I could go at it, because I feel like this angle, at least, we seem to all be in agreement on. So,
yeah.
Thanks for
Well,
calling
thanks
in.
for calling in.
yeah, thanks.
All right, we can try to get through. We got 2 more calls, and I think we could probably get through them before super chats. How are you
Yeah.
feeling?
Oh, I'm feeling
Yeah.
good. I'm solid.
Sweet. Let's do it. Okay, we're gonna talk to Cloud. Him from North Carolina wants to talk about how to talk to family members that might be narrow-minded. Tell us a bit more about your situation. Don't feel like you need to tell us like too much. Just whatever you're comfortable with, just so we can get a better idea.
Got you. First off, how y'all guys doing? Thank you for having me on the show. But it's more so like my dad. Like, it's not I'm not gonna name names, but it's where it comes to I get into arguments with him about a variety of things all the time. And normally he's the type of person where when he's presented enough information to show he's just demonstrably wrong, he'll change his mind. He'll change his mind. But when it comes to like trans issues, he thinks that all the science around it is like completely fabricated. It just like started popping up. And so every time he sees it, he will literally say, you don't even see that, like they're trying to trick you. Or he's saying like they're trying to push like an agenda on something. So normally the normal methods that will show them, they're like, hey, there's a study that proves that humans are in fact the species of the great ape and so on and so forth. That doesn't work when trying to talk to him about trans people. And I try to like show him like they've been studying trans people for a very long time, but also there's examples of trans people throughout history, and other cultures have very differing ideas on gender and sex that have not, because he's also very like, he thinks it's like a white people thing. I'm black, and so like he's one of those people like where he thinks a lot of like being gay, stuff like that, is like a strictly European Western ideology that they started forcing on him. He thinks that all of Africa was straight forever, and then but like white people came. He's one of those people, and so I guess my question would be how do you convince someone who normally can be sensible and will actually like, okay, I'm wrong in this, and they'll act accordingly to that, but when it's to one specific thing, they just like it's a brick wall.
That's a really tough one. Like, I'm not sure. I mean, I think that fundamentally this is the position that so many transphobes take, is like, it doesn't matter what data you present to them. And it just so happens with your dad that like, he is receptive to data, but just not on this particular issue, you know? Like, why would they need to have a bunch of laws in Africa criminalizing homosexuality if people in Africa never are gay? Like, you know,
yeah.
And I just don't know what to do with someone who, it's like, dude, normally you're not a dumbass, but right now you're being a dumbass. Like, I don't even know how I would approach that with my own family member. There's a reason why I don't talk to most of them at this point, you know? Like, I don't know if pointing out to him, like, look, dude, you can't just dismiss all the evidence on this. You can't just decide all this evidence doesn't count because you've decided it doesn't count. But like, that is the situation that we're dealing with so many transphobic people. And like, dealing with your, you know, coming it from your parents is even harder because there's this like power dynamic that they're entrenched in. They don't want you to change their mind. I'm sure it's been difficult for you in the past to like get him to be convinced of something, even if he is receptive to the evidence eventually. I'm sure that it's never an easy process anyway.
Never, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is super hard, and I probably don't have a lot of good advice because this is basically my family. Like different cultural background a little bit, but my family's in a similar boat where they firmly believe the things that they believe, and nothing at all can really persuade them. And I wish I had a better answer of some way that you could convince them. Unfortunately, I have not been able to do that with my family. And it's become an issue where we don't talk about it. And I set up very strict boundaries. And I'm like, this is not going to be an issue that I'm going to put myself like on the chopping block for. And so I don't talk to my family a whole lot. They know I don't really talk to them a whole lot, and it's one of those things where people will put as much bias into the scenario as they need to hold on to the things that they like prioritize. Like, and if they prioritize their perspective on this over the truth of the situation, then their brain's going to do whatever it can to hold on to that priority, which is really unfortunate. And I hope that someday they'll kind of find a way to come to it on their own, which really, that's with anybody. That's the biggest thing that will help is finding out on your own, what is your own perspective and your own decision to change your viewpoint. And family members are often the worst people to get involved because the tensions are higher. So like, as best I could say is like finding ways for them to stumble upon things on their own. But then again, the issue is their own mindset and their own willingness to engage with their biases on that topic. And that's up to them. And so a lot of it comes down to this ability to then say, okay, I've done what I can. I've said the things that I can. I've put the boundaries where I can. And then forgiving yourself and being kind to yourself in that their response and their willingness to change is not your responsibility. They're at a point where it's them. Like, their decision is theirs, which sucks. And I'd love for people to be able to change their minds and have an easier answer. But like, there's only so much that you can do from your perspective. And I just hope that you don't take it as a failure of your own that somebody else isn't being receptive. Like, that's not a flaw with you. That's a flaw with them.
Okay. I can definitely see that. The reason I ask is because it's a thing that he's trying to do, but like, he's very much into like being involved. He wants more children. That's a whole other weird shit. But it's also, he's very involved with like my nieces and nephews. And so they spend more time with him than they do with me. And he imparts a bunch of stuff that's just like, I can't spend enough time with them to combat all just some of the batshit insane things that he says to them. Yeah. So it's like, I want to see, okay, I can change him on these things. Why can't I do it on this thing? And it's just, I guess it's just been frustrating. But like you said, I probably shouldn't try to take that as a failure of my own.
I would say, like, if you have any times that you've changed his mind in the past, look back to those sources. Like, which sources did he trust enough to change his mind on before? And then looking and seeing, is there any information from those same sources around trans issues where he might be receptive? If you're like, look, here's this reputable article from this publisher, and you listened to them before. So do you think they were telling the truth about this other issue you already changed your mind on? Or are they lying about the trans issue now? Or is it possible that they're being truthful about both? You know, like looking at what specifically has moved him on it in the past, and like trusted sources and everything. Like, he's not necessarily going to trust your word for it. Like, obviously in the past, he's been receptive to like institutions that he views as an authority on the subject to some degree. So it's just about finding what authority he's willing to listen to. Because I completely understand, you know, feeling this increased urgency because you have younger family members who are being persuaded on this, and you don't want them to end up being mean to kids in their school or, you know, perpetuating those beliefs. Like, we do want to try to combat this for young people, especially. So that's like, I guess my one main piece of advice is like trying to find who has changed his mind in the past, who does he respect, and have they said something that might be able to help you move him on this?
Yeah, and another one, whatever time you do get with your younger family members, teach them to question. Teach them to question authority. Teach them to question everything. And like, that's a super easy thing that like kids are very good at asking questions. Like, they have this very good innate ability to be curious about the world around them. And so it won't take a whole lot on your end to teach them to ask questions, teach them to discover. Because at the end of the day, like if these younger family members are going to grow up, they're going to grow up with their critical thinking skills and their way of looking at the world. And if they can take their own investigation to what he's saying and say, you know, how do I know what he's saying is true? Like, you've just prepared them for so many things down the road, and you've hopefully can negate some of the things that your other family members doing to them, but just setting them up for success in that regard as well. So, like, you can even take a more gentle approach there and just encourage them to ask questions, and that might be a good way to go about it.
Gotcha. I'll try that. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks for calling in, Cloud.
I'd love to hear some updates with how this goes.
Definitely. I'll make sure I call back in. You're on the show again. But you guys have a good one.
Yeah, you as well. Take care. All right. Last one, we're going to take Jay, he, him from Wyoming. I believe that's Wyoming.
Yep.
Want to talk about otherkin. And I'm not the best person to be addressing this. So, Lux, I'll let you kind of take the lead on this one.
Cool. That's always fun. Like the one non-binary person who's going to be a regular host on the show. You get to take all these. All right. What's up, Jay? Tell us what your problem is. Tell us what you're thinking about.
Okay, hello. Happy Pride Month and happy Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, first of all.
Yeah.
And so my thing is, I've never really met a Therian or otherkin. I'm not sure what the proper terminology would be, but I've only met them online. I've never met them in person. I've met plenty of trans people in person, but the ones I've met online have been very adamant that they are part of the trans community. And I just wanted to, as a cis man, I wanted to ask trans people how they thought about that and what their thoughts and feelings are about that claim. Because I'm not really sure if that counts or not.
Yeah. So I think that a lot of the, let's say, anxieties about Therians and otherkin as it relates to the trans community, I'm very familiar with these arguments because they're the same anxieties that binary trans people have about non-binary people. Most of the people I know who would have described themselves as like otherkin or what have you are fundamentally they're non-binary people, right? And so like for binary trans people, there's this kind of roadmap that they have and they don't always follow it, right? But it's pretty like if you don't have boobs, you want to grow boobs, you know, that like if you're a woman, you're trying to get to this target location that is pre-existing where we already have this existing concept of like what a woman is. For non-binary people, we don't really have this kind of roadmap. And a lot of us, you know, it's either, okay, you need to look totally neutral, like a sexless being in order to be legitimately non-binary, or do you need to be actively clashing a bunch of male and female characteristics and feminine and masculine gender presentations? For a lot of us, we kind of struggle to figure out what is the end of that roadmap? Like, where are we going to the end of this thing? And it's also like, you know, there's kind of now a growing gender stereotype around being like a they. You're one of the theys now. And some of us are not like comfortable with that. We don't fit in with that. You know, there's a very particular type of aesthetic concept that's being built up around that tends to be, like honestly, fairly transmasculine, white and thin. Is this where this like stereotype ends up? And a lot of us don't identify with that. So if you are non-binary and you know that you don't identify strictly with male or female and you feel alienated from those concepts, and you also kind of feel alienated from society because society doesn't have a place for non-binary people. We have these pre-existing ideas of male and female. You have these roles that you can transition into. But for non-binary people, like, because there's this deep sense of alienation, some of us just kind of embrace that. And it's like, yeah, my gender might as well be pizza, because what the fuck does man and woman mean anyway? Like, what do those things mean in the first place? And it's like only when you exist outside of that dichotomy and you're trying to find your place that you end up using basically metaphor. It's kind of like how, you know, in like Game of Thrones, for example, it's like, oh, he's a lion because that's the symbol of his house, but also he embodies that concept. We've done this historically. Like we use animals as stand-ins for attributes, and it's functionally just that. Like, okay, if I don't identify as a man or a woman, and all of these things are kind of personality attributes at the end of the day, then yeah, like I might as well identify as a cat. If I really vibe with the idea of a possum, I might as well just say my gender is possum because what does it matter, So I would say it's always a non-binary person.
If I may cut in.
Yeah, please do.
Because I agree with most of everything of what you said, and I the way you phrase it helps me a lot understand. Like, I have a non-binary friend who identifies as frog gender, and I kind of thought it was a joke, but now I guess I kind of understand it a little better.
It kind of is a joke.
Not
I mean, sometimes.
Right, and that's not kind of the person I guess I had in mind. Like, I'm talking about the people who believe they are like a reincarnation of another animal living in the human animal body. Like, people who believe that they are, in fact, an actual wolf.
I don't think anybody genuinely believes that. They might be making pretend for fun, but like, unless you're talking about someone who's having like a schizophrenic breakdown, I don't think anybody is really identifying with it seriously. And if they are, it's because they're 15.
Well, there's some nuance to this, and I think like it's important to understand that maybe that's the best way that this person is able to communicate their identity to you as someone that doesn't understand what's going on in their head. And that might be the best way that they can articulate how they're feeling to you. And they might not mean for you to take it literally. They might. But either way, like, it's important maybe to separate the fact that you're being told something, and maybe that's not the full depth of what they're trying to communicate, just because our language is limited. And so this might be a way that they are using the language in the best way that they can to communicate what they're trying to communicate. And even so, let's say, well, also, like, let's say, like, if you have a friend, and let's say they really do mean that they're a frog in a human body, like, what does that do for you? How does that impact the way you treat them, other than just respecting their wishes? Like, what negative thing does that do?
I mean, for me personally, because I just incredibly lack an understanding of how that works functionally, I'm more than likely will just not interact with that person, because I can't comprehend someone who truly believes that they are another animal that's not human.
Yeah, I mean, and that's fair. You don't have to be friends with whoever you don't want to be friends with. But like, let's say you had this person and you ask them like, hey, how do I best respect you? What would you like me to call you in public? Like, how would you like me to interact with you? And maybe go from there, see what things that they say, because maybe you're preemptively saying that this is unreasonable, but haven't actually asked the question yet. And so how do you know if you don't know what this person's going to tell you? And I think maybe there's so much bias being thrown into this, and maybe the first step is the benefit of the doubt and saying, like, does this thing even matter for my friendship with them? Like, if at the end of the day, the goal is to be respectful and like treat them with dignity, like, a lot of times I feel like these minor differences or minor things in the ways that we identify with ourselves, like, the underlying concept is the same. And the underlying concept is that this is who I am. This is how I would like to be treated. Will you respect that? And I think at the end of the day, like, that's what we need to get to, regardless of what animal they use or whatever. And so I think maybe just reframing the way that we look at this and finding out what's important with this discussion is maybe how we should look at it.
Okay, I think I can understand from that perspective. And this is why I'm really glad I called in and asked, because it's just not a perspective I perhaps understand on a daily basis and haven't had the time to really zone in on. So I appreciate everything both of you have said.
And you might not not ever understand, and I don't understand a lot of things, but it's like it just because I don't understand isn't necessarily my place to tell somebody else that like they can't be who they are.
Well, absolutely.
So,
As
yeah,
long as
I think-
everyone's being safe, sane, consensual, and not hurting anyone else, if you want to identify as a cat, frog, a mushroom, I don't care.
Mushroom
Yeah,
gender.
I
Oh,
think
Didn't
yes, mushroom. Yeah, I think that's just how we need to go forward. But I'm curious, like if there's any other discussion, definitely call back. We're kind of at the end of the show today, but thanks for calling in.
Thank you all so much for taking my call, and I hope you all have a great rest of your month. If I don't end up calling back this month,
you too.
Yeah, happy Pride. All right, lots of interesting calls today, and I kind of want to let you have the last word for that particular discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I will say almost everybody I've ever known who identifies with a xenogender is transitioning. So, like, I don't know under what definition you could say that they're not trans. And if they're a non-transitioning person, then again, it's just the same type of anxiety that we have around non-transitioning, non-binary people. And, like, I think that sometimes people who have transitioned can feel like, yo, you are speaking out of turn if someone who has not transitioned is starting to speak as though they're an authority on the issue. It's like you can speak from a place of your functional place in society is a gender non-conforming person, but that is functionally different than going through medical transition and the particular issues that there is there. But like the umbrella encompasses gender non-conforming cis people, in my opinion. The broadest definition of trans includes like people who are experiencing violence and rejection and societal like boxing out because of their gender expression. So it's like I just don't split hairs about it as much anymore. I'm sure that people will disagree with me on that, but it's all who's the true trans, but who the fuck gets to decide? Like, why are you making yourself an arbiter of who gets to be in the club or not? You know, like we're all suffering.
Yeah. So I think, just going back to the whole respect thing, like, why are we having this discussion? Why are we talking about this? Because we all want to be respected. We all want to respect each other. And I think we're all on the same page with that. So let's get to some super chats. I heard we have some people submitting these, and there's still time to submit your super chats, $5 or more, and we will read them out loud. Would you like to go first, or would you like me to go first?
Oh, I'll go ahead and take this one. That's, I think, £5 from Sean Isherwood. Floof in 2022 found a formula for the nth decimal digit of pi without having to compute any of the previous n1 digits. You can make me say it, but you can't make me understand it. You with your math commentary.
Yeah, we love all the math commentary here.
It's like Futurama. I don't get any of the math jokes.
Yeah, I would if I had the time to write things down and process, maybe, but it's too fast paced here. 20 pounds from Jackie Greenland. Rest in peace, Lynn Conway. As an engineer, she was a hero of mine before I ever knew she was trans. We lost a Titan this week. And during Pride Month too. Yeah, it's rough.
May her memory be a blessing. Here's a $10 from Alyssa Nguyen. TERFs think M and W to M&M doesn't happen. I'd like to think there was one guy who I'm sure felt a little strange when he found out that his wife had a sex change. Jerry Springer and Weird Al, referring to a Jerry Springer and Weird Al reference.
Love that reference.
For sure.
Next, we have $5 from Rydori768. Is hormone therapy a candidate explanation for period-like symptoms, or was it the God question where I don't know is the only valid answer? And I know there was this discussion last week and a little bit before this, but yeah, it is. It's not even just a candidate explanation. Like, it is a very reasonable explanation for period-like symptoms.
For sure.
And this is the fact too with like cis people. This is true with trans people. This is also true with like cis men. Like, I don't know if people have heard of menopause. Like, menopause is a real thing. having deficiency in any type of hormones like causes changes, and same thing, extra hormones of any type like causes changes. So yeah, it's not just a candidate explanation, it is the most reasonable explanation that we have.
It's
So,
not psychosomatic. It's probably hormonal.
yeah, it's hormonal. Yeah.
$9.99 from Alice Rosas. I want to do Pride, but I picked no. I have bad anxiety and I'm too scared to go alone, but I don't have any friends. Even Pride merch scares me because I don't like drawing attention to myself. This feeling sucks. Yeah, the idea that like I didn't want to go to a big Pride celebration because I was not confident that like, I mean, I live in Kansas. In Kansas City, there was a Chiefs celebration thing after the Super Bowl and there was a shooting there. And like, it was the first time in my life that I've been like, oh my God, I know like 20 people who are there. And having to go like checking my Facebook to be like, who has marked themselves safe? Like, and then just the idea of putting myself in that position where Pride is so much more of a contentious thing. And I didn't hear any issues at Pride this year in Kansas City. But yeah, like I completely understand that. And like, I don't even want to put a rainbow sticker on my car because I don't want my car to get like vandalized, right? It's not cool that we live in a place where we have to be concerned with violence for being visibly queer, essentially, or for gathering with other queer people. It sucks.
Yeah, and it's okay to not go to big Pride events. Like, if you want to celebrate Pride in your home with like a few people or even just yourself and or a pet, like that's still Pride. All Pride is valid. And however you want to celebrate Pride, like being a person in existence who is queer is radical in itself and is a statement of pride. So you feel free to celebrate Pride in whatever way is most comfortable for you. They are all valid as long as you are kind and respectful.
Just have a little celebration at home. You'll be fine.
Celebration at home. Yeah.
$5 from Alyssa Nguyen. Yeah, I'll just take it. It's fine.
Okay.
Watch something with less spiciness. That's what I'm going to interpret that as meaning. Insulin, glucagon. Oh, is this? You should do this one. You should know these words better than I do.
I don't know this song though, but I guess there's a physiology song. Insulin and glucagon coming from the islets of Langerhans, lipase, amylase, and trypsin. They're going to help with our digestion. Yeah, I mean, and here's something too. I think the point that is meant to be here is that these are hormones. These are all hormones. We fuck with our hormones all the time, and there's nothing unusual about it. It's great.
Yep.
Be trans. We got the flag there.
Yeah, someone was asking like what flag it was, so I was like, I have to put it on display now.
Yeah.
I guess
£5. I could take.
Yeah, I mean, if you want. Oh, it was at Ben. Let me see. Yeah,
I was like, I don't. Yeah, I was like,
I can't read.
And yeah, I don't even know what the order is anymore. We'll figure it out. €5 from Jonathan Brockett. At Ben, when you say full size mango dick, do you mean full girth? Oh, and did you finish the entire thing? I did not finish the entire thing because it was life size. I got the smallest one because I'm poor. So I got the 6-inch, but they had one. I think the largest they had was an 8-inch, and like it looked life size. But that's a lot of sugar, and I don't need that much sugar. And it was full girth. Yeah, like it was like a life size dick, and it was great. It was more so just, in front of the Capitol building, but it was hilarious because like you get all the responses from the other queers at Pride, and they're like, "Where'd you get that? I want one." And it was the best.
You're very popular, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
$5 from William Matz. How can you tell if you're intersex? Also, Lux, about your pronouns. Is it's in the same place as her, him, them, or is it like hers, his, theirs? So let me answer your first question. How can you tell if you're intersex? It depends on how kind of intersex you are. Like, you might have to have a chromosomal test done. You might have to go harass your childhood doctor to see if your medical records were sealed after a procedure was done on you when you were a baby. But typically, you'll have some kind of, I mean, like, PCOS is even considered a difference of sex development to some extent nowadays. So it's like, are you having innate hormone weirdness? Is it affecting your health in some way? If you have like
some of them,
go ahead.
Some of the most easy ways, like one of the most common ways to detect intersex conditions are infertility testing. Usually,
Sure.
where most people get diagnosed is infertility testing. But yeah, you might not know. You might not ever know if you're intersex. There's so many different varieties of conditions: hormonal, chromosomal, etc. And yeah, chromosomal testing, ultrasound can detect some of them. Like hormone testing, if you really care enough, but no one's gonna order those unless you're having distress. But yeah, there's so much variety. If you're curious, you can bug your doctor, but you can also, if you're more curious about the chromosomal side, you can get some of those overly priced online DNA tests. Yeah, I mean, you can do that for yourself. Otherwise, it's gonna be harder to get like someone to sign off on. Yeah, let's just do all the scans and everything.
It's expensive. Like, there has to be a reason for you to get them most of the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other half of the question, so it's it would be it's. So like, it is going to get its thing from its locker. So like, the possessive is its. So I mean, just think of it like you're talking about like a creature that you would use its for. I don't know. Like, oh, look at that bee. Look at where it's going. But then it's a person, kind of.
Love it. Grammar lessons.
Making xenogender jokes. It's cool.
Love it. See, you can make jokes. You can make jokes.
It's true.
Next one. 69 check sex. I'm just going to call... I have a joke where I call everything, all of the Kroner, all those variety. I just call them all sex because it's easier. So we got 69 check sex from Naresh. Miraculously, I'm able to get here for a moment at work. I finished early and have nothing to do. Hashtag team Ben isn't or Bean isn't. Hope the show is fun when I watch. I'm going to be struggling trying to figure out how to pronounce Ben isn't or Bean isn't, but I don't know. It sounds weird. I hope you enjoy that soundbite, Naresh.
Mm-hmm. $5 from Alec says, love the show. Would love to call in eventually about intersectionality of trans people in military service soon. As a fellow veteran, hashtag Team Ben.
Yes, and you will have to wait until the next time I'm available to show up to one of these shows, and I don't know when that is, so we'll figure that out. But we'll love to hear about it. $5 from Jonathan. Good choice at the line for bringing Lux on. Love you too, Ben. Happy Pride. Yeah, and I think it's an amazing choice to bring Lux on. It feels awkward like having a show about trans issues and not having non-binary representation. It's something we've needed for a while, and Lux is obviously an amazing candidate. We love Lux.
And I love all of you, random citizens.
I love you, random citizens.
Yeah, that's a Megamind ref. Sorry, it's a great movie.
Megamind's like the best movie. I love that movie. It's not as good as Shrek, good. But it's still up there.
It's hard to compete with Shrek, let's be honest.
Yeah.
$5 from Adrian Morgan. Thank you so much for the super chat. My 2 favorite hosts on my favorite show for my birthday. Great conversations and great vibes. Hashtag trans masks keep winning. Happy Pride. Happy birthday and happy Pride. Thank you so much, Adrian, for spending your birthday with us.
Yeah, and your money. Why are you spending your birthday money on us? That's not acceptable. But I mean, you do you. But happy birthday, happy Pride. 50 sex from Puck Tholander. I know other kind that is cis and very serious about their identity.
Cool.
Like
yeah, them. Like I don't Yep. Personalities. They're all different kinds of personalities. Like, do you remember the Power Rangers movie? And they were all like, they got their little powers.
Yeah.
And then he was like, I'm a frog. And she was like, no, but frogs are great. And then it's because their personalities matched with whatever. Anyway.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. $5 from Monkey at Typewriter. Lux's description of Otherkin was great. I love learning about other people's experiences. If only people could appreciate rather than interrogate. True. Yeah, like, why are you interrogating me? I would much rather just be like, you be like, okay, cool. And then move the hell on. Like, I don't want to talk about it all day either.
Right. Like, your only question should just be like, how do I best respect you? And usually they're very happy to tell you how they would like to be addressed.
It's pretty easy.
Yeah. $5 from Eliashana Silverbow. I'm butchering that, I know. I went to the doctor because I accidentally swallowed some food coloring. They said I'd be okay, but I think I died a little inside. Happy Pride Month. Love the joke.
That was a good pun.
It's clever.
Solid pun.
Bring the cringy puns. We love them.
Yes. Oh my God. Yeah. If you cringe at it, you know it's a good pun. You know it's good wordplay.
Yeah.
Another $5 from Monkey at Typewriter. Thank you very much. Also, Ben, your shirt is amazing. I'm a D&D kid and DMing my first game now. Got a fave class? I feel like Wizard in the streets, Bard in the sheets. That is a good shirt.
I play bards. I mostly play bards. I also like to play warlocks, but if I have a class I got to go back to, I love bards. Bards are great. But I like role play. That's my favorite part of D&D.
Oh, of course. I just started my very first D&D game. We're supposed to go for like a year is kind of the plan. And it's a Stardew Valley themed thing. But my character is a druid, and he's going to spec into being a Circle of Spores druid, which I think is the best gender. Like, he's going to get so creepy and weird. And like, because it's like a death druid, basically. It's like having a necromancer in the party. So that's my
Stardew Valley tabletop roleplay is like the most transmasc non-binary thing like you've said all day. Like, there's a vibe.
Yeah. There's
a vibe with my non-binary friends and their Stardew Valley everything. That is
the DM is also a transmasc person. So yeah,
I was
sure.
like, that tracks. Yeah.
Absolutely.
$5 from Biker Nurse Ratchet. Thanks for a great show and a great education. Thank you. And your name is always just great.
It is a good one.
Just love the nerd references. Love it. Sorry, I'm not talking up today. My man cold is acting up.
Oh no, it's tough being sick. That's why I wear a respirator everywhere, because getting sick sucks. $5 from Laser Lizard says, I've been type 1 diabetic since I was 8. Technically, I've been on HRT for 22 years, 16 years before I got on estrogen. Hormones be funky sometimes. Yeah, like, it's kind of like how pronouns has become a stand-in for trans issues. Like, even though everybody has pronouns and everybody uses pronouns, and they many times don't even have anything to do with gender. Like, yeah, we have lots of hormones that don't have anything to do with gender. Yeah, like hormone replacement therapy. Yeah, that's pretty funny.
Yeah, it's wild. Yeah, if we started referring to insulin as hormone replacement, that would just stir up a lot of controversy. It'd be amazing. It looks like those were all the super chats we have for today. Thank you everybody for showing up to this lovely show. Send your congrats again to Luxander for being our newest addition to the crew. We're very, very excited for everything coming up in the shows in the future, and we'll see you all next time. Bye, everybody.
Oh shit, I forgot to do hold on. You're gonna fucking, it's not over yet, motherfuckers. We gotta do the patron scroll. I hit the wrong button.
Yeah, I was like, I was waiting for the time where I have to sit here awkwardly.
That's right. You're not out of it. Yeah, you still have the awkward sit.
Gunslinger is a great name.
Now we're done. Bye.